On the 11th of July, 1869, a tired column of cavalry and scouts rode out of the Colorado Sandhills and into history at a place called Summit Springs. What followed was a sudden, violent clash that shattered the Cheyenne dog soldiers and marked the last major armed resistance on the Colorado Plains. But behind the official reports and later legends lies a far more complex story, one shaped by broken treaties, retaliation, sacrifice, and survival. This is not a tale of frontier triumph or stage show heroics, but the real story of how a people fought, how a leader chose to stand, and how the plains were changed forever. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. By the late 1860s, the southern plains were already soaked in blood and broken treaties. The 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie had recognized much of eastern Colorado as Cheyenne and Arapaho land, but the Colorado Gold Rush of 1858-59 sent thousands of settlers streaming across the plains in open violation of that agreement. In 1861, the Treaty of Fort Wise drastically reduced native territory to a small reservation between the Smoky Hill and Arkansas rivers, a deal many Cheyenne, especially younger warriors, flatly rejected. According to Richard H. Wilhusen and Neil Lovell, this split hardened generational lines within the tribes, with leaders like Black Kettle urging peace, while militant warrior societies prepared for resistance. No event radicalized those warriors more than the Sand Creek Massacre of the 29th of November, 1864, when U.S. volunteer troops under Colonel John Chivington attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village despite assurances of safety. The Cheyennes were told if they relocate to a certain area, fly an American flag and a white flag, they would not be seen as hostile and therefore not attacked. Black Kettle relocated his peace-seeking Cheyennes exactly where they were told and flew the flags proudly. John Chivington, hoping to cement a reputation as a famed Indian fighter, attacked the sleeping village, slaughtering men, women, and children. According to the book, Black Kettle, the Cheyenne chief who sought peace but found war, by Tom Hatch, when the attack started, Black Kettle stood outside his lodge, grasping his flagpole and begging for peace, as the volunteer soldiers, under Chivington's orders, committed atrocities. Chivington at first achieved what he had wanted, but as time went on, the truth came out, and he was investigated for attacking not a hostile warrior camp, but a camp of women and children with men who only wanted peace. The massacre would ignite years of retaliation across the plains. According to Wilhusen and Lavelle, Sand Creek marked a turning point that transformed sporadic violence into sustained war, pushing many Cheyenne warriors into open, uncompromising resistance. At the center of that resistance to the Cheyenne dog soldiers, or, bear with me here, Hotomateo. As Legends of America notes, the Cheyenne were already regarded as among the most warlike peoples of the plains, but the dog soldiers represented something more, an elite military society bound by ritual, discipline, and an iron sense of duty. An Ohio reporter covering treaty negotiations at Medicine Lodge in 1867 described them as armed to the teeth, proud, haughty, defiant as should become those who were to grant favors, not beg them. They were not merely fighters, they were enforcers of tribal law, guardians of the buffalo hunt, and keepers of order within the camp. The dog soldiers' authority was absolute when on duty. They acted as tribal police, enforcing hunting rules, punishing disorder, and ensuring the survival of the entire camp over individual ambition. Punishments could be severe: whippings, destruction of property, even the killing of a man's horse, but their power rested on respect rather than fear alone. Their rituals were elaborate and secret, involving days-long ceremonies and hundreds of songs, binding members into a brotherhood that fused military obligation with spiritual commitment. By the 1840s and 1850s, the dog soldiers had evolved from a society into a dominant political force. Cheyenne chiefs increasingly deferred to them on matters of war and peace. They negotiated lasting peace with the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache after hard fighting in the 1830s, led campaigns against the Pawnee in the early 1850s, and constantly warned that dealings with white settlers would end badly. That warning hardened into certainty after Sand Creek. From that point forward, the Dog Soldiers refused treaties, reject reservations, and became the spear point of Cheyenne resistance along the Platte, Smoky Hill, Republican, and Saline rivers. In 1868 and 69, Dog Soldier war parties led by the fierce Tallbull carried out raids across north-central Kansas, striking settlements and immigrant routes in retaliation for years of broken promises and massacres. According to John H. Monette, these raids, particularly those along the Republican and Saline rivers, prompt the U.S. Army to respond with force. Brigadier General Christopher C. Auger ordered a campaign to clear the region, rescue 2 captured women, and destroy Tallbull's band once and for all. That mission became the Republican River Expedition. In June 1869, Colonel Eugene A. Carr led nearly 250 troopers of the 5th U.S. Cavalry, supported by Pawnee scouts under Major Frank North and guided by civilian scout William F. Cody, more famously known as Buffalo Bill. Carr spent weeks tracking Tallbull across Nebraska and Kansas as the Dog Soldiers used every trick they knew, splitting camps, braiding trails, vanishing into the plains. It was a method that had saved them before. This time, it would lead them to Summit Springs. After weeks of skirmishes, false sightings, and braided trails that kept slipping away into the plains, Carr's column finally began to close in during the first week of July. According to James T. Keene, Major Frank North's Pawnee scouts moved out early on the 11th of July, and the hand-picked cavalry detachment followed, leaving the slower supply wagons and their escort to fall behind. By about 7:30 in the morning, Carr's men had splashed through the twisting Frenchman River repeatedly and pushed west, only to be jerked into sudden gallops when scouts reported Indians ahead. Twice, those alarms turned out to be wild horses. That morning rhythm, tension, spirit, disappointment, matters, because it explains why Carr was both hungry for contact and wary of getting fooled again. Late in the morning, the pursuit entered rougher country along the breaks and bluffs near the Platte. Keene notes that around 10:30 in the morning, the Pawnee again signaled that horsemen had been spotted and urged Carr to conceal the whole command in a ravine. Great caution followed. Men dismounted, led their horses over ridges, and threaded steep ravines to keep out of sight. Ahead, the trail split, one line drifting toward the Platte, the other striking across the sand hills. Carr gambled that the lighter trail to water was a true line of march, reasoning that Tallbull's people, like his own exhausted column, couldn't afford to wander dry country without water. That decision, betting on the river, proved decisive, because Tallbull had in fact halted on the south side of the South Platte. Tallbull's choice to stop was shaped by the conditions at the river. According to Wilson and Lavelle, the South Platte was running at full flood stage, and Tallbull decided not to risk fording it. He believed his band had eluded pursuit. Wilson and Lavelle described a camp of roughly 84 lodges and almost 400 people, with hundreds of ponies and over 120 travois loaded with goods. They also know the scale of what the band carried from spring raids. Almost 10,000 pounds of dried bison meat, 700 cured hides, along with materials and gold coin, as well as 2 captives from Kansas, Suzanne Alderdice and Maria Weichel. Emily Lavelle adds that Tallbull had reached the river the day before and camped in the bluffs to rest the women, children, and elderly before attempting the crossing. Put simply, a flooded river, a heavy camp, and fatigue produced a pause that Carr's scouts were desperate to exploit. Through early afternoon, Carr still wasn't entirely sure the animals being sighted were Indian horses. Keene described a moment around 2 o'clock when Pawnee scouts pointed out a distant herd among the hills. Carr, burned by earlier false alarms, suspected buffalo, but he couldn't risk being wrong and ordered the command to prepare for battle. There's also a messy but important detail about Royal and Cody that will become important later on. Carr detached companies under Brevet Colonel William B. Royal with Scout William F. Cody to check one reported herd and had not returned. But Keene stresses that accounts later became contradictory, and he argues that Royal and Cody had joined Carr before the assault, despite later recollections claiming otherwise. Carr's command slipped forward under cover of sandhills, depressions, and shallow ravines, staying hidden until they were dangerously close to the village. The ground itself worked against both sides. Deep, loose sand that sapped the strength of already tired horses, a rising wind that stirred dust into the air, and a haze that dulled visibility. By 3 p.m., with concealment no longer possible, Carr formed his men for the assault. The sudden sound of the bugle cut through the stillness, and the cavalry surged forward in a long, grinding charge that covered nearly a mile of open ground. The attack unfolded in a coordinated sweep, with elements driving toward the Pawnee herd, others smashing directly into the heart of camp, and additional troops angling to cut off escape routes. The Pawnee scouts were among the first to reach the lodges, and the effect was immediate and devastating. The village was taken completely by surprise, struck so suddenly and so close that many of the Cheyennes barely had time to react before the fight was already upon them. From the Cheyenne side, the fate of the camp turned on a single, desperate act. As the charge broke from the sandhills, a young Cheyenne herd boy saw the attack unfolding and ran toward the village. Realizing what was at stake, he drove the pastured horses straight into the camp, giving his people the one thing they needed most: mobility. In a fight where survival depended on speed and escape, that stampede allowed many to flee. Legend says that the boy then turned and made his last stand, fighting till the end. He was killed during the assault, his sacrifice buying precious moments for others as chaos swallowed the valley. Once the cavalry burst into the village, the battle shattered into a dozen fights at once. Troopers rode through the lodges while Pawnee scouts engaged Cheyenne warriors at close range, often in small, violent clusters. The long charge had stretched and thinned the attacking line, but its momentum carried it deep into the camp before any organized defense could form. Many Cheyenne barely had time to reach their horses, some not even that, before the village was overrun. Amid the dust and gunfire, women and children were rushed away from the lodges and guided into a nearby ravine by Two Crows, while warriors tried to hold back the attackers long enough to cover their escape. Men like Black Sun, Lone Bear, and Pile of Bones stood and fought, but they were quickly overwhelmed as the three-pronged assault closed in. What followed was not a single, clean clash of armies, but a brutal collapse into close-quarters fighting, Pawnee against Cheyenne, soldier against warrior, as the defense splintered and the Dog Soldiers' camp was torn apart. Tallbull's last stand formed in the ravine southeast of the village, where the ground itself shaped the final resistance. As the camp collapsed, Tallbull, members of his family, and a small group of warriors took shelter in one of the narrow cuts, trying to hold off the attackers long enough for others to escape. Among those fighting, there was a highly regarded dog soldier named Wolf with plenty of hair, or heavy-furred wolf, who represented the last expression of dog soldier society. He drove his dog rope into the earth and bound himself to the fight. The rawhide tether, decorated with porcupine quills and feathers, was fastened to a wooden picket pin, anchoring him to a single patch of ground. From that moment on, there would be no retreat. The length of the rope defined the limits of his world, the space in which he would stand and fight. It could not be pulled free by his own hand. It would remain there until his people were safely away, until another warrior released him, or until death claimed him where he stood. It was his last resort, and there he made his final stand for his people. How Tallbull himself was killed has never been settled cleanly, and the uncertainty speaks more to later storytelling than to the moment itself. Claims were made for Major Frank North, for Buffalo Bill Cody, and even for another officer, but the debate quickly drifted into legend and self-promotion. What matters more than who fired the fatal shot is what followed. Tallbull chose not to flee. He placed his wife and child where he believed they might survive, killed his own beloved horse rather than let it be taken, and returned to the fight knowing the battle was lost. When his body fell in that ravine, the effect rippled far beyond Summit Springs. The Dog Soldiers did not lose merely a leader, they lost the man who had held their resistance together. By late afternoon, the camp was shattered. Survivors fled southeast across the broken ground, pursued until the soldiers' exhausted horses began to collapse under them, many dropping from sheer fatigue rather than enemy fire. In the village and surrounding ravines, fighting sputtered on in isolated pockets as soldiers and Pawnee scouts searched desperately for the two white captives. When the gunfire finally faded, the cost was unmistakable. Of the 2 white captives taken during the Kansas raids, Suzanne Alderdice was dead, killed during the chaos of the battle, while Maria Weichel survived despite being badly wounded. She was found in the shattered village, terrified and bleeding, fearing at first that she had merely passed from one captor to another. Carr's men made her as comfortable as circumstances allowed, placing her in an ambulance as the command consolidated its position. Aside from her injuries, the Army suffered remarkably little. Carr officially reported only 1 trooper slightly wounded, a stark contrast to the devastation left behind. As soldiers and Pawnee scouts searched the camp and surrounding ravines, the scale of the victory emerged. Carr wrote in his official report, 52 Cheyenne lay dead, many of them killed while making their last stand in the ravines. 17 women and children were taken prisoner. Hundreds of horses and mules were captured, along with enormous quantities of food, weapons, and supplies. Dried meat, hides, rifles, bows, ammunitions, and the material wealth accumulated during months of raiding. By nightfall, Carr ordered the village destroyed. Fires were set across the camp, dozens burning at once, until the lodges and everything that could not be carried away were reduced to ash. That night, a violent storm swept across the battlefield. Thunder, lightning, and heavy rain crashed down on exhausted men still straggling in from pursuit, as if the plains themselves were closing the chapter. The following morning, mist hung low over the grassland as details were sent out to count the dead and gather stray animals. At sunrise, the command paused for a burial. Suzanne Alderdice was wrapped in lodgeskins and laid to rest on the battlefield, far from her Kansas home, while an officer read the service in the absence of a chaplain. It was a quiet, sobering moment amid what many would soon hail as a great victory. With Tallbull dead, the Dog Soldiers ceased to exist as a unified force. His band broke apart almost immediately, some drifting south to join Cheyenne on land set aside by the government, others fleeing north to merge with the Northern Cheyenne. According to George Bent, himself a member of the Dog Soldier Society and later one of the most important voices preserving Cheyenne history, the Dog Soldiers were never again in a decisive power after Summit Springs. The warrior society that had once shaped war and peace on the plains was fractured beyond recovery. For the U.S. Army and frontier settlers, the result was framed as final. Summit Springs marked the end of armed native resistance on the Colorado Plains. Carr's success was praised in military correspondence, state legislators passed resolution of thanks, and newspapers across the country carried headlines announcing the destruction of Tallbull's village. The Republican River country, long feared and contested, was now declared open. Within a few years, homesteads, farms, and towns would spread across land that had once been a battlefield. For Buffalo Bill Cody, Summit Springs became something else entirely. Though he had fought as a scout, the battle soon took on a life far beyond the dust and gunfire of the 11th of July, 1869. Dime novels quickly credited him with killing Tallbull, reshaping his earlier reputation as a hunter into that of a heroic Indian fighter. By the 1880s, Summit Springs had been transformed into a spectacle. In Cody's Wild West show, this battle became a climactic reenactment, Buffalo Bill charging in to kill Tallbull and rescue the captive women. History reduced to a single dramatic moment, stripped of its complexity and suffering. But who really killed Tallbull? Well, like much of history, it's complicated. According to James T. King, the exact way in which Tallbull met his death has long been a subject to controversy. Credit has been given to William F. Cody, Major North, and Lieutenant George F. Mason. Cody was first given credit by the sensational writer E.X.C. Judson, better known as Ned Buntline. Even General Carr, published after his death, says that Tallbull, quote, firing as he charged, was killed by Cody's unerring rifle fire, and that when Cody led a horse into camp, Mrs. Tallbull said that was her husband's horse. There's also the fact that Cody may not have even been at the battle at all. Remember earlier in the episode when I talked about how Royal and Cody were sent to scout another herd of reported horses? According to Norse recollections many years after the incident, Carr said he would wait a while for Colonel Royal to join him before making a charge on the village. After waiting perhaps half an hour, the general said he would wait no longer, and we started. But then General Carr does state later that Royal had rejoined the column before the battle. But Keene brings up the fact that Carr himself, immediately after the battle, stated that the chief had killed his horse just before falling. At the end of the day, Mr. Keene believes the story told by author Alfred Sorensen to be the correct one. Quote, "Upon reaching the ravine, Tallbull placed his squaw and child inside where he thought they would be safe, and he then returned to the mouth of the ravine and shot his magnificent steed rather than see him fall into the hands of the enemies. The Cheyennes in the ravine kept Major North and his party at bay for some time. While the fighting was still going on, one of the Indians climbed to the top of the bank nearest the soldiers, and raising his rifle slowly over the top of the bank, he laid it down on top of the ground, and then poking it up sufficiently to take a sight along the barrel of the weapon, he fired directly at Major North, but missed him and disappeared into the ravine. Major North marked well the spot where the Indian had dropped his head out of sight, dropped down on one knee, and awaited the reappearance of the Indian's head. Soon the Indian raised his head up to take aim. Major North instantly fired, and the Indian dropped dead without firing. Later in the day, the dead chief, Tallbull, was found in the ravine, directly under the spot where he had climbed up to fire at Major North. If you're confused, welcome to history. I don't know what to think. I can't say with 100% accuracy who killed Tallbull. Yet the story of Summit Springs did not end with myth. More than a century later, efforts by Cheyenne descendants to reclaim sacred items taken from the battlefield exposed a darker legacy hidden in museum collections. In 1986, Northern Cheyenne elders, including William Tallbull, a direct descendant of Tallbull, attempted to recover a ceremonial pipe held by the Smithsonian. Instead, they learned the scope of what had been taken. Not only sacred objects, but thousands of indigenous human remains, in which the museum refused to give to the Northern Cheyenne, which is insane to me. But this moment helped spark the movement that led to the National Museum of the American Indian Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Those laws opened the door to the return of countless sacred objects to their rightful tribes, and made possible the repatriation of thousands of Native American ancestors who had long been held in museum collections across the United States. Today, the battlefield lies quiet on private land southeast of Sterling, Colorado. A rough road leads towards the ravines and now dammed springs, marked only by memorials and locked gates meant to protect the site. There are two markers on the site. One for Suzanne Alderdice, the captive who was killed in battle. The other tells of the brave 15-year-old herd boy who sacrificed his life to try and save his people, of the men who died, and of Richard Tallbull who came to visit the site 100 years later. Looking across the rolling short grass prairie, it is difficult to imagine the smoke, panic, and violence that once tore through this place. But the silence is deceptive. Summit Springs did not merely end a battle. It ended a way of resistance, gave birth to a national myth, and left scars that continue to shape how history, memory, and justice are contested on the plains. I hope you all enjoyed this episode on the Battle of Summit Springs. If you did, please give a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, please give a 5-star rating and hit that follow button. All of this really helps me grow and reach new listeners. Thank you for everyone's support. Y'all are amazing, and I can't say that enough. Join the membership family. For just $1, you'll get access to bonus content like James H. Levy, the Forgotten Gunfighter. Thank you to the membership family. Y'all are greatly appreciated. We will see y'all next time, and remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.